It was super wildcard weekend in the NFL last week. 6 big games happened, and all but one was decided by a touchdown or less. I will give you all the highlights of super wildcard weekend in the NFL. So, under further ado, let's get started with all the games of the wildcard weekend. First of all, it's Colts versus Bills. The Buffalo Bills and the Indianapolis Colts led up the 2020 super wildcard weekend. The Bills were looking for their first playoff win since 1995. Well, the Colts were trying to lead off the weekend off with an upset. Indy got a 30-yard field goal by Rodrigo Blankenship to lead things off and go 3-0. Buffalo would answer right back with a touchdown pass from Josh Allen to Dawson Knox to go up 7-3. In the second quarter, Jonathan Taylor would find the end zone on a 1-yard touchdown run. Right before the half, Josh Allen would take it in himself to go up 14-10 at the break. Early in the fourth quarter, Josh Allen and the Bills led by 7 and got a 35-yard touchdown pass to his number one target, Stephon Diggs, to go up 24-10. On the next possession, the Colts would score from a Phillip Rivers to a Zach Pascal touchdown pass, but missed the two-point conversion to have the score remain at 24-16. Late in the game, Indy trailed 27-16, and Phillip Rivers would find Jack Doyle and make the two-point conversion to trim Buffalo's lead to 27-24. However, the Colts would turn the ball over on down on their final possession to fall the Bills 27-24. The AFC East champs held on to win their first playoff win in 25 years with a win over the Colts. The Bills will host the Ravens next Saturday night on NBC. Josh Allen was 26 of 35 for 324 yards and 2 touchdown passes. He also had 54 yards on the ground and 1 rushing touchdown. Stephon Diggs at 128 yards receiving and 1 TD. For the Colts, Phillip Rivers could have played his final game in the NFL. He was 26 of 45 for 309 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jonathan Taylor rushed for 78 yards in 11 attempts and 1 TD. Michael Pittman had 5 receptions for 90 yards. Rams versus Seahawks. The LA Rams traveled to take on the Seattle Seahawks in the first round of the NFC playoffs. The Seahawks were trying to continue the run as they faced their better rival, the Rams. However, Russell Wilson could not figure out LA's stingy defense. The Rams jumped out to a 3-0 lead and never looked back. In the second quarter, Russell Wilson threw a rare pick six by Darius Williams, who took it 46 yards to the house. LA's lead increased to 13-3 late in the second quarter. The Seahawks finally scored on a touchdown pass from Russell Wilson to DK Metcalf to trim the lead at 13-10. The Rams would take a 20-10 lead going into the half. However, the Rams would lose Aaron Donald, their best player, for the rest of the game with a torn rib cartilage, which was a huge blow for LA. However, the Rams defense still played great even without their two-time, probably now soon to be three-time defensive player of the year. They would force 5 Seattle punts. The Seahawks would only score 10 points in the second half as LA would hold on to beat the Seahawks 30-20. The Rams will play the Packers this Saturday. Jared Goff did not start the game but came in for John Wolford and was 9 of 19 for 155 yards. He also threw 1 TD pass. Cam Akers rushed for 131 yards and 28 carries and 1 tutty. Cooper Kupp had 4 receptions for 78 yards. For the Seahawks, Russell Wilson was 11 of 27 for 174 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 INT. Chris Carson had 16 carries for 77 yards. DK Metcalf had 5 receptions, 96 yards, and 2 touchdowns. The Bucs versus the football team. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Washington football team played on Saturday night on NBC. Tampa was a heavy favorite to advance, but Washington wasn't going to lay down easy. Before the game, Chase Young famously said he wanted the 6-time Super Bowl champion Tom Brady. Tampa started the game off with a 3-0 lead. In the first quarter, Tyler Heinicke would get the start for the Washington because of an injury to Alex Smith. Heinicke had played for a plethora of teams as a practice squad quarterback. He would throw an interception that led to the first score of the Bucs, as Brady would find Antonio Brown to go up 9-0, but they would miss the extra point. The football team would answer right back with a 2-yard rushing touchdown by J.D. McKissick to trim the lead to 9-7 Bucs. The Buccaneers would go up 18-7 at the half as Brady would find Chris Godwin and Tampa would get 3 points going into the break. Washington would continue to battle with the Bucs as they hung around with the Bucs for the entire contest. The NFC East champs would get a field goal and 2 touchdowns in the second half. Although Washington played Tampa tough, it wasn't enough to upset the Buccaneers. Tampa Bay did enough to beat the football team 31-23. Brady was 22 of 40 for 381 yards and 2 touchdown passes. Leonard Fournette rushed for 93 yards and 19 carries and 1 tutty. Mike Evans had 6 receptions for 119 yards. For Washington, Tyler Heinicke was 26 of 44 for 306 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. He also had 46 yards on 6 carries and 1 TD. Cam Sims had 7 receptions for 74 yards. The Buccaneers will now travel to New Orleans for the third time and face the Saints in the second round of the NFC playoffs. The Ravens versus Titans. Lamar Jackson was hoping to get his first playoff win in his career as he faced the Tennessee Titans. The Ravens lost to the Titans last year in the second round as Derrick Henry ran all over Baltimore. This time things would be a lot different. Derrick Henry, who had another great year as he rushed for over 2,000 yards this season. In fact, he was the only ninth player in NFL history to rush for over 2,000 yards in a season. The Ravens defense, however, stuffed Henry as he had less rushing yards than Baltimore's quarterback Lamar Jackson. Tennessee, though, would jump out to a 10-0 lead in the second quarter as they forced the Ravens 3-and-out and forced a Lamar Jackson INT. The 2019 AFC North champs will get a field goal in their next possession to trim the lead at 10-3. The Purple Pain forced the Titans punt and would score in their next possession as Lamar Jackson took it to the house for a 48-yard rushing touchdown. The game would remain tied 10 going into the half. In the third quarter, Baltimore would find the end zone as J.K. Dobbins would take the 17-10 lead. Baltimore would hold on as Ryan Tannehill would throw an interception late in the fourth quarter as the Titans lost to the Ravens 20-13. Defensive back Marcus Peters would get the last laugh as he would pick off Ryan Tannehill and dance along with his teammates on Tennessee's logo. The reason was when the Titans and Ravens played earlier this season, Tennessee's players went on the Ravens logo in the middle of the field and danced on it. As you can imagine, the Ravens players and coaches took offense to it. The rivalry is so intense right now that neither team shook hands after the game. Stats for the game was Lamar Jackson was 17 of 24 for 179 yards and 1 interception. He also rushed for 138 yards on 16 attempts and 1 rushing touchdown. Marquise Hollywood Brown had 7 receptions for 109 yards. For the Titans, Ryan Tannehill was 18 of 26 for 165 yards, 1 TD, and 1 interception. Derrick Henry rushed for 48 yards on 18 carries. And last but not least, A.J. Brown had 6 receptions for 83 yards and 1 touchdown. Bucs versus Saints. Next game we're going to talk about is Chicago versus New Orleans. Many people were calling it the Nickelodeon game, as the kids' network Nickelodeon was actually broadcasting the Bears versus Saints. It was hosted by Noah Eagle and former NFL wide receiver Nate Burleson. The game was also broadcasted on CBS and Amazon Prime by Jim Nantz and former NFL quarterback Tony Romo. The Saints were hoping to get another win with Drew Brees and head coach Sean Payton. Drew Brees' record before the game against the Bears was 8-8 in the postseason. The Saints got off to a slow start as they only had a 7-3 lead going into the half. However, in the second half, the Saints' offense had a spark. Drew Brees would find Latavius Murray and Alvin Kamara would get in the end zone to go up 21-3. On the final possession, the Bears would score to Mitchell Trubisky to Jimmy Graham to make the game more respectable. Final score, New Orleans 21, Chicago 9. During the Nickelodeon broadcast, every time a team scored, there would be slime. Crazy, right? Stats for the game was Drew Brees was 28 of 39 for 265 yards and 2 touchdowns. Alvin Kamara rushed for 99 yards and 23 carries and 1 TD. Deontay Harris had 7 receptions for 83 yards. Going to the offseason, the Bears have a lot of questions on if Mitchell Trubisky is their guy. We'll find out when the freaky frenzy offseason begins. Mitchell Trubisky was 19 of 29 for 199 yards and 1 TD. David Montgomery rushed for 31 yards, and Allen Robinson finished with 55 yards receiving. And last but not least, the Browns versus Steelers. One of the most underrated rivalries in all of football. Many expect the Steelers to take care of the Browns like they always do. In fact, the Browns haven't beaten the Steelers in Heinz Field in almost 17 years. But that would not be the case. The Browns jumped out to a 28-0 lead in the first quarter. To make matters even worse, Marquise Pouncey would snap the ball over Roethlisberger's head and result in a Cleveland touchdown to start the game. Cleveland hasn't won a postseason game for almost 17 years. Cleveland continued their spanking on the rivals by leading 35-10 at the half. The Dog Pound forced 4 Big Ben interceptions, despite him throwing for over 500 yards, and he did throw for 4 TD passes. Even though the black and gold made a comeback, it wasn't enough. Baker Mayfield threw 3 touchdowns, 264 yards, and was 21 of 34. Nick Chubb rushed for 76 yards. Jarvis Landry had 92 yards receiving and 1 TD. For Pittsburgh, Ben Roethlisberger threw for 501 yards, 47 of 68, 4 TD passes, and 4 INTs. James Conner rushed for 37 yards and 11 carries. Juju Smith-Schuster had 13 receptions, 157 yards, and 1 touchdown. Thanks for listening to the Sports Town Podcast, or the STP Pod for short. You can find us on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and much more. We release new episodes every Wednesday and Friday. Also, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Sports Town Podcast. If you want to check out more videos of the Sports Town Podcast, click on the left. If you want to subscribe to the channel, click on the right.